A man just fell off a 16-foot steel cage, and he's lying on the concrete floor not moving. The arena has gone completely quiet, with 20,000 people holding their breath at the exact same second. The medics are running. The announcers have stopped talking. A WWE broadcast live on pay-per-view has just turned into something nobody in that building knows how to process. And then Jim Ross, the voice of a generation, says something into that microphone that nobody scripted, nobody planned, something that came straight from his gut because he genuinely believed it was true. Good God Almighty, they've killed him. And here's what you need to understand before we go any further. That man on the floor knew this was coming. He asked for it. He walked into that arena, looked at a 16-foot cage, and made a decision that defied every human survival instinct that exists. Not because he was crazy, not because he didn't feel pain, but because Mick Foley had made a promise to every single person who ever bought a ticket to watch him, and he refused to break it, even if it broke him first. And this is the story of the most brutal match in WWE history. And more importantly, it's the story of the man who chose to walk into it. So before we even get to that night, you have to understand who Mick Foley actually was, because the story doesn't hit right if you skip this part, because Foley wasn't built like a WWE superstar. He wasn't 6'5" with chiseled abs and a movie star jawline. He was round, he was soft-spoken, he had frizzy hair and a flannel shirt and a missing ear. But here's what made Mick Foley genuinely different from everyone else in that locker room. He felt nothing like a normal human being, not because he was superhuman, but because he had an almost frightening willingness to absorb punishment that would end most men's careers or their lives. And he'd been doing it for years on the independent circuit, in Japan, in ECW, falling off cages, being thrown into barbed wire, hitting concrete floors, and just getting back up, operating under this personal philosophy that stayed with him his entire career. Give the people something they'll never forget. And at King of the Ring 1998, he delivered on that promise in the most terrifying way imaginable, because the match was Hell in a Cell. And if you've never seen one, imagine a wrestling ring surrounded by a 15-foot tall chain link cage with an actual roof on it. No escape, nowhere to run. Designed to be the ultimate finishing chapter to a feud with no interference, no exit, just two people trapped inside steel. And Foley's character at the time was Mankind, this bizarre, twisted, masochistic figure who wore a leather mask and made horrible shrieking sounds. But underneath that character was a guy who was completely lucid, thoughtful, calculated, and deeply committed to giving wrestling fans a moment they'd carry with them forever. And his opponent was The Undertaker, the defining figure of WWE's dark supernatural side. 7 feet of menace wrapped in a black coat, whose matches inside Hell in a Cell were already legendary. And what nobody knew, not the announcers, not the crowd, not even most of the other wrestlers, was what Foley had already agreed to do before the bell even rang. Because the match started on top of the cage, not inside it, on top of it, 16 feet above the arena floor on a chain link surface that flexed and shifted beneath every step, and the crowd was immediately on edge. You can see it in the footage. Thousands of people craning their necks, standing on their chairs, not sure whether to cheer or cover their eyes. And then The Undertaker grabbed Mick Foley by the throat and threw him off the top of the cage, and Foley fell 16 feet through the announce table and hit the concrete floor, and the arena went silent. Not quiet, but silent. The kind of silence that only happens when an entire crowd of 20,000 people collectively forgets how to breathe. And Jim Ross broke on commentary. His voice cracked. He screamed, "Good God Almighty, they've killed him!" And he wasn't playing a character in that moment because he genuinely didn't know. And medical staff rushed the ring while Foley wasn't moving, and then impossibly Mick Foley started to get up. And the crowd didn't cheer, they screamed because they didn't know whether to celebrate or be horrified. And he had a dislocated shoulder. He'd lost a tooth which had gone up through his lip and out through his nostril. He was bleeding. He was barely conscious, and the match wasn't even close to over because they climbed back to the top of the cage. Why? Because Foley insisted. Because in his mind, the story wasn't finished, and the crowd hadn't gotten everything he planned to give them, and then The Undertaker choke-slammed him, and the cage gave way, and Foley fell through the roof, crashed through the steel mesh, and dropped another 15 feet into the ring below, landing on his back with a metal chair following him down and hitting him directly in the face, and he was out, completely unconscious, and Jim Ross was barely holding it together, screaming, "Will somebody stop the damn match?" While Foley came to mid-ring to the sight of thousands of people on their feet, not even sure what they'd just witnessed, and thumbtacks were poured into the ring and he was slammed into them. He took a tombstone piledriver. He absorbed all of it. The match ended. Foley had lost. His body was destroyed. He had literally fallen from the sky twice in one night. But nobody in that arena, and nobody who has watched it since, ever forgot his name. And people ask sometimes why professional wrestling matters, why it resonates with people the way it does, and I think Mick Foley is the answer. Not because of the fall falls, not because of the blood or the broken bones, but because of what he was willing to sacrifice for a moment that would outlive the match itself. Because he once wrote in his memoir, "I want people to look back and say that crazy son of a gun gave everything he had." And if this story hit you the way it hit me, subscribe, drop a comment, and let me know what the most unforgettable moment you've ever seen in wrestling is, because I'll see you in the next one.